Welcome to Untold Stories. I'm James, an airport security officer, and today you're about to witness a story that turned an ordinary checkpoint into a moment no one would forget. He looked like just a history teacher.
No uniform.
No special clearance. Just another traveler in a crowded terminal. But when he rolled up his sleeve for screening, everything stopped, because on his wrist wasn't just a watch. It was a symbol of a past no one dared to speak of. And from that moment on, no one ever saw him the same way again. When they pulled his bag aside at O'Hare International, Theodore Reed stood quietly as the TSA agent emptied his belongings for all to see. Just an ordinary history teacher on an ordinary day until they found the watch. The agent smirked at the Navy SEAL emblem. Nice replica. Then she turned it over. The entire checkpoint went silent. Security cameras pivoted. Something about the serial number and engraving made her freeze. Sir, come with me, please. Some heroes never wear their medals. Some wars never make the history books. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If the story resonates with you, consider subscribing. We share untold stories of extraordinary ordinary people every week. The fluorescent lights of O'Hare International cast everyone in the same unflattering pallor as they shuffled through security. Theodore Reed adjusted the strap of his canvas duffel, his weathered hands betraying an age his posture refused to acknowledge. At 56, he blended perfectly into the backdrop of travelers. Another unremarkable face in a sea of the hurried and inconvenienced. When the facial recognition camera flickered, Theodore noticed. No one else did. Sir, step over here, please. TSA agent Lorraine Winthrop's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who had said the same phrase thousands of times. Random additional screening. Theodore nodded, stepping aside without protest. Around him, the security line continued its shuffling choreography, travelers casting sideways glances, that universal look of sympathy tinged with relief that it wasn't them. Please place your bag on the table, Lorraine instructed, snapping on a fresh pair of blue nitrile gloves. Theodore complied, watching as she unzipped his duffel with methodical precision. The contents of his life were extracted and displayed on cold stainless steel. Neatly folded clothes arranged by color, a dog-eared copy of For Whom the Bell Tolls, a prescription bottle of anti-inflammatory medication, a carefully wrapped high school history textbook with yellow post-its marking specific pages. You're a teacher? Lorraine asked, not looking up as she continued her search. History, Westfield High, Theodore answered quietly. Behind him, a young couple in matching university sweatshirts exchanged glances. Poor old guy, the man whispered, not quite quietly enough. Probably his big vacation of the year. Theodore's expression remained neutral, but his eyes briefly met those of a woman waiting in line. Late 40s, dark hair touched with silver at the temples. Unlike the others, she wasn't pretending not to watch. Something in her gaze suggested she recognized the indignity of the moment. Lorraine's hand paused at the bottom of the bag. What's this? She extracted a worn leather case roughly the size of her palm. Just an old watch, Theodore replied. Military memorabilia. Lorraine's tone shifted to light condescension. My nephew collects this stuff too. The replicas are getting pretty good these days. She flipped open the case, revealing a tactical watch with a faded Navy SEAL emblem on its face. The black band was worn smooth in places from years of wear. Nice replica, she said loudly, drawing more attention. In line, a muscular man with USMC tattooed on his forearm straightened slightly, his attention caught. This was Brendan Montague, and unlike the others, his interest wasn't casual curiosity. Lorraine turned the watch over carelessly, about to toss it back into the bin when something caught her eye. She squinted at the serial number etched into the metal back, then at an engraving below it. Chimera Protocol June 14th, 03 Verum in Tenebris. Her expression changed in an instant. Confusion, then uncertainty, then something approaching respect. Sir, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, could you please step over here with me? The small crowd that had gathered to watch the search dispersed quickly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. As Theodore was escorted toward a door marked secondary screening, he noticed three things simultaneously. Brendan Montague had stepped out of line and was watching intently. The security cameras on the ceiling had pivoted in his direction, and the woman who had met his gaze earlier had disappeared completely. The game he had avoided for 20 years had finally found him again. The secondary inspection room was deliberately claustrophobic, windowless, furnished only with a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 uncomfortable chairs. Theodore sat with perfect posture, the watch now back in his possession, resting on the table before him. When the door opened, it wasn't Lorraine who entered. Commander Amelia Blackwood moved with the assurance of someone accustomed to command. Her naval uniform was immaculate, decorations speaking of a distinguished career, though anyone with knowledge of special operations would notice the conspicuous absence of certain insignia, omissions that told their own story. "Professor Reed," she said with unmistakable respect. "It's been a long time." Not long enough, apparently. Theodore's voice had changed, deeper, more authoritative. This was not the voice of a high school history teacher. Amelia dismissed the 2 agents flanking her with a subtle gesture. Once the door closed, that watch shouldn't exist. The operation was scrubbed from all records. And yet here we are. Theodore picked up the watch, turning it over in his hands. "How did you find me so quickly?" "We never lost you, Theodore. That was the agreement. You disappear. We don't look, but we always know." The fluorescent light flickered, and for an instant, Theodore wasn't in Chicago anymore. Night vision, the world of phosphorescent green, 6 figures moving through mountain terrain, whispered communications, the distant thump of helicopter rotors, a cave entrance appearing suddenly in the rock face. Theodore, 20 years younger but unmistakable, giving hand signals to his team. Chimera was decommissioned, Theodore said, returning to the present. Along with everyone who knew about it. Amelia's expression hardened. 3 days ago, satellite imagery confirmed activity at coordinates matching your watch's engraving. Someone found the cave system. That went very still. That's not possible. They found something, Theodore. Something we missed 20 years ago. I buried that life for a reason, Amelia. The reconnaissance team we sent in hasn't reported back. You're the only one who knows those tunnels. The only one who survived them. Outside the room, Brendan Montague had positioned himself near the water fountain, pretending to check his phone. His posture, weight evenly distributed, back to the wall, clear sightlines, marked him as military as surely as his tattoo. Inside, Amelia placed a secure tablet on the table, displaying satellite imagery of familiar mountains. I wouldn't ask if there were any other options. There are always other options. Theodore's tone was ice. You're just not willing to accept the casualties. Your country needs you one last time, Ghost. At the code name, Theodore closed his eyes briefly. Another flash. Lieutenant Zara Calloway bleeding from a wound to her abdomen, pressing something into his hand. Get them out, Ghost. That's an order. The cave collapsing behind them as they ran, sealing Zara inside forever. Zara died securing that site, Theodore said quietly. And now her sacrifice might have been for nothing unless we finish what Chimera started. Amelia leaned forward. The device is still active, Theodore, and someone has it. The private lounge was a stark contrast to the inspection room. Comfortable leather chairs, muted lighting, the hushed atmosphere of privilege. Theodore sat alone by the window, watching aircraft taxi across the tarmac as evening approached. The watch lay heavy in his palm. His phone chimed with a text message.
Package en route.
ETA 20 minutes. Professor Reed. Theodore didn't need to look up to recognize the voice.
Marine Corps, Afghanistan.
And you've been eavesdropping. Brendan Montague approached cautiously. I was Echo Team, sir. Afghanistan 2015, he hesitated. They still tell stories about Chimera. Theodore stiffened, eyes narrowing. My father was Dagger 6, Brendan continued. Staff Sergeant Elias Montague. Recognition flashed across Theodore's face. Surprise, then something softer. Elias, a pause. He had a son. He never told us what happened that night, just that his commanding officer was the finest man he ever served with. Brendan snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute that spoke of years of discipline. Whatever you need, sir, I'm in. Theodore stood slowly, returning the salute with the precision of someone for whom such movements were muscle memory, never truly forgotten. They're going to need someone who can still move quickly, Theodore said. I'm just the navigator. They'll need someone they can trust, too. The door opened. Amelia returned carrying a secure metallic case. Behind her followed 2 operators, 1 male, 1 female, both wearing civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise their bearing. Gentlemen, Amelia said, we have a plane to catch. A small unmarked Gulfstream idled on the tarmac, its engines humming with restrained power. Theodore, now dressed in tactical gear that suited him far better than his teacher's attire ever had, methodically checked his equipment. Amelia approached, handing him a sealed envelope. Presidential authorization, full autonomy. Just like old times, Theodore said with grim humor. Brendan approached with the 2 operators from the airport, professionals who understood that names were unnecessary. Professor Reed taught history for 20 years. Brendan told them as they prepared to board. Did you ever wonder why he knew so much about unconventional warfare? I always told them the truth, Theodore replied, checking the magazine in his sidearm with practiced ease. To understand history, you have to know what they left out of the books. As they climbed the stairs to the aircraft, Amelia caught Theodore's arm. The mission parameters have changed since your day, Ghost. We bring everyone home now. Some promises you can't keep, Commander. Theodore secured the watch to his wrist. No longer a relic, but an active piece of equipment. But I appreciate the sentiment. The aircraft door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, cutting off the last rays of sunset. Inside, maps were already being unfolded, weapons checked, communications established. And somewhere in the mountains, half a world away, something that should have remained buried was awakening. The Gulfstream cut through the night sky, a ghost against the stars. Inside, Theodore studied the mission briefing, absorbing the details with the focus of someone accustomed to processing life-or-death information. Across from him, Brendan Montague watched with barely concealed curiosity. You have questions, Theodore said without looking up. Few, sir. Ask them now. Once we land, there won't be time. Brendan hesitated. Chimera protocol. Is not in any official record. That's not a question, Marine. What were you looking for in those caves, sir? Theodore closed the file. The other 2 operators, introduced only as Victor and Tessa, glanced up from their equipment checks. In 2003, intelligence intercepted communications about a Soviet-era research facility hidden in the Hindu Kush, Theodore began. Deep in a cave system the locals considered cursed. According to the intel, the Soviets had developed something there during the final days of the Cold War. Something that never made it out. A weapon, Brendan asked. A device, Theodore corrected. The distinction matters. Operation Chimera was tasked with locating and securing it before anyone else could. And did you? Theodore touched the watch at his wrist, a gesture so habitual it seemed unconscious. We found it. Lieutenant Calloway stayed behind to ensure the site was permanently sealed while we extracted with casualties. His voice remained measured, betraying nothing. The cave collapsed. We assumed everything inside was buried forever. Including Lieutenant Calloway, Victor said quietly. Including Zara. Yes. The silence that followed carried weight. Through the window, dawn was breaking over unfamiliar mountains. Sir, Tessa spoke up, her voice crisp with professionalism. Commander Blackwood only briefed us on extraction parameters. What exactly are we retrieving? Theodore met her gaze. The Soviets called it Project Zerkalo, the Mirror Project, a quantum entanglement device designed to observe any location on Earth in real time, regardless of shielding or countermeasures. Brendan frowned. That's not possible. It shouldn't be, Theodore agreed. But they found a way. The problem was power. The device required so much energy that it could only operate for minutes before burning out its containment. That's why they built the facility in the caves, harnessing geothermal energy. But something went wrong in 1989. The entire research team disappeared. Disappeared how? Victor asked. According to the one surviving witness, they simply vanished while testing the device. Every single researcher simultaneously. The aircraft began its descent, the conversation pausing as they secured their gear. Only when they were minutes from landing did Brendan speak again. My father never told us what happened on Chimera, but he had nightmares until the day he died. Theodore nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged everything left unsaid. Some burdens aren't meant to be shared, son. That was his gift to you. The mountains of northern Afghanistan remained as unforgiving as Theodore remembered. Their insertion point was a narrow plateau 10 miles from the cave system, chosen for its defensibility rather than convenience. As the team disembarked and the aircraft departed, the vastness of the landscape imposed a sobering reality. They were alone. "Comms check," Tessa called, adjusting her earpiece. Each team member verified their communications, movements efficient from years of training and experience. Theodore observed with approval. These weren't the raw recruits he'd led 20 years ago, but seasoned operators who understood the value of silence and precision. The cave entrance is here, Theodore indicated on the satellite map. Or was. After the collapse, we'll need to find an alternative entry point. There's a network of smaller tunnels approximately 2 kilometers northeast that should connect to the main system. What about the reconnaissance team? Victor asked. Their last transmission came from this location. Theodore pointed to a different spot on the map near one of the old Soviet ventilation shafts. We'll start there. As they moved out, falling into a natural formation with Theodore and Brendan on point, Tessa taking right flank, and Victor covering their six, Theodore felt the years melt away. His body remembered this rhythm, this hyper-awareness where every sense was attuned to potential threats. The mountains, the weight of equipment, the responsibility of command, all familiar companions he had never truly left behind. 3 hours later, they reached the coordinates of the missing team's last transmission. A metal grate, rusted but intact, covered a vertical shaft disappearing into darkness. Motion sensors showing negative, Victor reported, scanning the area. No heat signatures within range. They came this way, Tessa confirmed, kneeling beside faint boot prints in the rocky soil. For operators, standard equipment. Theodore studied the grate. This wasn't here before. The Soviets concealed their ventilation systems to avoid aerial detection. Someone uncovered this recently. With practiced efficiency, they removed the grate and prepared for descent. One by one, they rappelled into the darkness, helmet lights illuminating rough stone walls as they descended nearly 100 feet. The air grew colder, tinged with mineral scents, and something else, something metallic that triggered memories Theodore had spent decades suppressing. At the bottom, they found themselves in a narrow service tunnel, its concrete walls marked with Cyrillic characters and faded hazard symbols. Air quality is good, Victor noted, checking his equipment. Surprisingly good for an abandoned facility. Because it's not abandoned, Theodore said quietly, pointing to barely visible footprints in the dust. Multiple individuals moving with purpose. The recon team? Brendan asked. Some of these are different, Tessa said, examining the tracks. Civilian footwear, lighter tread patterns. They followed the tunnel for nearly a kilometer, moving with the silent efficiency of predators. When they reached a heavy blast door, partially open, Theodore held up a closed fist. The team froze. This is wrong, he whispered. This door was sealed when we left. Beyond the blast door lay a scene that belonged in a science fiction film rather than an abandoned Cold War relic. The facility's main chamber was operational, bathed in the blue glow of modern equipment that contrasted sharply with the Soviet-era infrastructure. Workstations had been established, cables snaked across the floor, and power generators hummed with steady output. But the chamber was empty of personnel. Where is everyone? Brendan voiced the question they were all thinking. Theodore approached a central platform where a spherical device, approximately 1 meter in diameter, sat mounted on a complex array of instruments. The sphere's surface appeared to be made of some dark material that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Is that it? Tessa asked. The Zircalo device. Theodore shook his head, an unfamiliar tension in his movements. No, that's not it. That's something new. Sir, Victor called from a side terminal where he'd been examining equipment. You need to see this. The screen displayed what appeared to be a countdown, nearly complete, with Cyrillic text flashing urgently. We need to leave, Theodore said, his voice suddenly sharp with command. Now, they were halfway to the blast door when the sphere activated, emitting a high-pitched whine that seemed to bypass their ears entirely and vibrate their bones. The air in the chamber rippled like heat waves over asphalt. Move, Theodore ordered, but his voice sounded wrong, stretched and distorted. The rippling intensified on the platform. The sphere began to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, though nothing was physically turning it. The whine escalated to a pitch that made their teeth ache. And then silence. For one impossible moment, everything stopped. Sound, movement, even the dust particles suspended in their helmet lights seemed frozen. Then reality reasserted itself with violent force. The blast wave knocked them all off their feet, helmet lights flickering as they slammed into walls and equipment. Theodore recovered first, years of combat experience overriding the disorientation. Status, he demanded, voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. Operational, Victor reported, already on his feet, weapon ready. Same, Tessa echoed, though blood trickled from her nose. Functional, Brendan confirmed, shaking his head to clear it. On the platform, the sphere was gone. In its place stood a figure. At first, Theodore thought his vision was compromised from the blast. The figure seemed to shift and blur as if viewed through water. But as it stepped down from the platform, its form solidified into something humanoid but wrong. Proportions subtly distorted. Contact, Victor warned, weapon raised. The figure turned toward them, revealing a face that approximated human features arranged in a configuration that sent instinctive revulsion through everyone who saw it. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere at once. Ghost, we knew you would return. The voice was impossible. A voice Theodore knew had been silenced 2 decades ago beneath tons of rock and earth. Zara, he whispered. The thing wearing Lieutenant Calloway's distorted face smiled, an expression of too many teeth. Not anymore, but she's here along with all the others. We've been waiting for you to open the door again. Theodore raised his weapon, the action automatic after years of training. What are you? We are what happens when the mirror breaks, the thing said, taking another step forward. When observation becomes participation. Brendan fired the first shot. The bullet passed through the figure without resistance, striking equipment behind it. The entity didn't react, continuing its advance. The recon team, Tessa demanded. Where are they? Here, the thing said, gesturing to itself. They're everywhere the mirror shows. Theodore made a decision. Fall back. Tactical retreat to the tunnel junction. As they backed toward the blast door, maintaining disciplined formation despite their alarm, the figure made no move to pursue them. Instead, it watched with a curious tilt of its misshapen head. You can't contain it anymore, Ghost, it called after them. The mirror has been active for 20 years, watching, learning. We're coming through. The last thing Theodore saw before they sealed the blast door was the figure beginning to duplicate. A second identical form stepping out from within the first like a magic trick. Both wearing the same distorted version of Zara Calloway's face. They retreated through the tunnel network with practiced precision, covering each other's movements as they put distance between themselves and the chamber. Only when they reached the junction Theodore had indicated did they pause, establishing a defensive perimeter while Victor attempted to raise headquarters on their secure comm system. No signal, he reported after several attempts. Something's interfering with transmission. It's the mountain, Theodore said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. We need to get to higher ground. Sir, Brendan's voice was carefully controlled. What was that back there? Theodore checked his weapon, an automatic gesture that bought him seconds to organize his thoughts. 20 years ago, Lieutenant Calloway stayed behind to destroy the Zircalo device. The cave system collapsed. We assumed the mission was complete. But it wasn't, Tessa said. Whatever that was, it knew you. It wasn't Zara, Theodore stated firmly. The Soviets were experimenting with quantum observation, the ability to view any location without physical presence. But the scientists disappeared during testing. We theorized that the device created some kind of breach, a connection to somewhere else. Somewhere else? Victor asked. Like another country? Like another reality? Theodore corrected. A parallel dimension, perhaps, or something worse. The mission parameters were to locate and destroy the device, not to understand it. And now it's active again, Brendan concluded. But someone else got here first. Theodore nodded. The countdown we saw wasn't an activation sequence. It was a timer for the next connection event. We need to set charges and collapse the entire facility, Tessa suggested. Complete the original mission. Not without finding the recon team, Brendan countered. You heard that thing, Victor said quietly. I don't think there's a team to find anymore. A distant sound interrupted their discussion. A metallic groan that reverberated through the tunnel system. Then another, closer. Move, Theodore ordered. Topside now. They navigated the labyrinthine tunnels with increasing urgency, guided by Theodore's unerring sense of direction. The sounds pursued them, growing closer. At an intersection, Victor hesitated, checking the tunnel to their right. Contact, he whispered, raising his weapon. Down the corridor, a figure approached, human in shape, but moving with jerky, unnatural motions. As it entered the pool of light from their tactical lamps, they saw it wore the uniform of the missing reconnaissance team. But the face was wrong. Features flattened and simplified, as if drawn by a child's hand. Reynolds, Tessa breathed, recognizing what remained of her former teammate. The thing that had been Reynolds stopped, head tilting at an impossible angle. Then it smiled, the expression spreading too wide across its face. Tessa, it said, voice eerily perfect despite its distorted appearance. We've been watching you for so long. More figures appeared behind it. Some wearing military uniforms, others in clothing none of them recognized. Designs both foreign and anachronistic. All had the same distorted features, the same wrong proportions. Contact rear, Brendan warned, turning to cover their backs as similar figures appeared from the tunnel they had just traveled. They were surrounded. Flashbangs, Theodore commanded. On my mark. The diversionary grenades bought them precious seconds, the brightness and concussive force momentarily disorienting the entities. The team moved with coordinated precision, using the confusion to break through the thinner line of figures blocking their path forward. Victor took point, Tessa on rear guard, with Theodore and Brendan forming the core. They moved as a single organism, years of training evident in every step and covering motion. But the things pursued them with unnatural speed, their movements becoming more fluid and coordinated with each passing moment, as if they were learning. When they reached the vertical shaft that led to the surface, Theodore made a decision. Victor, Tessa, ascend. Brendan and I will hold position and follow. With respect, sir, Tessa began to object. That's an order, specialist. We need a secured extraction point. As Victor and Tessa began their ascent, Theodore turned to Brendan. Set demolition charges here and at the junction. 15-second delay. Brendan worked with swift efficiency, placing the C4 charges while Theodore maintained covering fire. The entities were more cautious now, using the tunnel's architecture for cover, displaying tactical awareness that made them far more dangerous than mindless pursuers. One magazine left, Theodore reported as Brendan finished setting the final charge. Charges set, ready to ascend. They began their climb, the weight of their equipment making the ascent grueling. Below them, the first of the entities reached the base of the shaft, looking up with empty approximations of eyes. Then it began to climb, moving with inhuman speed, fingers digging into the rock wall as if it were soft clay. Detonator, Theodore called. Brendan handed over the remote trigger without breaking his climbing rhythm. Theodore waited until the leading entity was halfway up the shaft, then pressed the button. The explosion compressed the air in the shaft, propelling them upward as the tunnel below collapsed. Rock and debris filled the space beneath them, crushing anything in its path. The shock wave caught them just as they reached the surface, Victor and Tessa pulling them clear as the entire shaft imploded. For several long moments, they lay on the rocky ground, catching their breath as dust billowed from the destroyed entrance. The morning sun illuminated the scene with harsh clarity. Think that stopped them? Brendan asked when he could speak again. No, Theodore replied. But it bought us time. They took stock of their situation. Equipment damaged but functional. Supplies sufficient for 48 hours. Communications still compromised. The nearest extraction point was 30 kilometers away across mountain terrain. Sir, Victor said quietly, scanning the horizon with binoculars. We have another problem. In the valley below, strange distortions shimmered in the air, like heat mirages, but more structured. Within each distortion, shapes moved, some humanoid, others decidedly not. The mirror is breaking, Theodore murmured. The barrier between realities is failing. What's the mission now, sir? Tessa asked, the question carrying the weight of professional soldiers needing clear objectives in an impossible situation. Theodore considered their options. The original Chimera mission had failed. That much was clear. Whatever had happened 20 years ago when Zara stayed behind, it hadn't destroyed the Zircalo device as intended. Instead, it had created something worse, a breach that had been slowly expanding for 2 decades. New mission parameters, he decided. We need to reach the extraction point and deliver what we know. This is beyond our capabilities now. And the recon team? Brendan asked. They're gone, Theodore said with finality. Whatever those things are, they're not human anymore. They moved out, maintaining tactical formation as they navigated the treacherous mountain slopes. The distortions in the valley seemed to be spreading, creating patches of wrongness where the laws of physics bent in subtle, nauseating ways. They gave these areas a wide berth which forced them onto higher, more difficult terrain. By mid-afternoon, they had covered nearly 10 kilometers, pushing through fatigue and the unsettling awareness of what pursued them. During a brief rest, Brendan approached Theodore, who was studying their route on a topographical map. My father told me once that the worst thing he ever saw wasn't in combat, Brendan said quietly. It was in a cave in Afghanistan. He said you saved them all that day, but at a cost. Theodore looked up, his expression unreadable. Your father was a good soldier, one of the best. What really happened, sir, with Lieutenant Calloway? Theodore was silent for a long moment. The device was active when we found it. Zara was the first to approach it to try to shut it down. Something happened, a reaction we didn't understand. She ordered us to retreat while she set the demolition charges. He paused, the memory still vivid after 20 years. The last transmission we received from her was different. She sounded afraid, but not of dying. She said, they're coming through, Ghost. Don't let them follow. And the cave collapsed. Brendan finished. I set additional charges at the entrance myself. Theodore confirmed. Buried it all. Reported the mission complete, device destroyed, but we never recovered Zara's body. Because she never died, Brendan realized. She was taken, changed, or replaced, Theodore suggested grimly. We'll never know for certain. Their respite was interrupted by Victor, who had been maintaining watch. Movement, 2 o'clock. Multiple contacts. Through binoculars, they observed a group of figures moving across a ridgeline approximately 1 kilometer away. Their movements were more natural now, coordinated and purposeful. They were being hunted. They're cutting us off from the extraction point, Tessa noted. Hurting us. Then we changed direction, Theodore decided. There's an old Soviet outpost here, he indicated on the map. If it's still intact, it might have communication equipment we can use. As they altered their course, the distortions in the valley continued to spread, some now large enough to swallow buildings. Within these rifts, impossible landscapes became visible, alien geometries that hurt the eyes to observe directly. They reached the abandoned outpost as dusk approached. The small cluster of concrete buildings, weathered but still standing. While Victor and Tessa secured the perimeter, Theodore and Brendan searched for anything useful. In what had once been a communications room, they found old Soviet equipment, long dead. But beside it sat something incongruous. A modern satellite terminal, recently installed. Someone's been here, Brendan observed. Recently. The same people who reactivated the facility, Theodore agreed. Question is, were they working with those things or running from them? The terminal was operational but locked. Tessa, who had joined them, examined it with professional interest. I can bypass this, but it'll take time. Do it, Theodore ordered. Victor, Brendan, defensive positions. We hold here until we make contact. As night fell, they watched more distortions appear across the landscape, spreading like a slow infection. The entities that pursued them maintained their distance, visible occasionally through night vision as they established positions around the outpost. They were being contained, not attacked, which suggested a purpose beyond simple elimination. Terminal active, TSA reported finally. Patching into military satellites now. The connection established, Theodore transmitted their situation report, including everything they had witnessed. The response was immediate and not what they expected. Chimera Actual, this is Watchdog Authentication Code Sierra Echo Victor Echo November. Your transmission is confirmed. Maintain position. Delivery protocol authorized. Theodore felt cold recognition at the code phrase. Delivery protocol. They're going to bomb the entire area. That's insane, Brendan protested. We're still here. That's the point, Theodore said quietly. They're not taking any chances this time. The original Chimera protocol included a failsafe, a final solution if the device couldn't be controlled. He looked at each of them in turn. They know we've been exposed. We're compromised. So we're being written off, Victor concluded. Collateral damage. Not if I can help it, Theodore responded, turning back to the terminal. Watchdog, this is Ghost. Request extraction for my team before delivery. We have critical intelligence on the nature of the incursion. The pause before the response came was telling. Negative, Ghost. Area is quarantined. Delivery in 30 minutes. Your service is acknowledged. Theodore looked at his team, professionals who understood the implications. They were being sacrificed to contain the breach. Options? TSA asked, pragmatic to the end. We run, Theodore decided. There's a mountain pass 3 kilometers north. If we can get through before the strike, we might survive the initial blast. And the entities? Victor asked. They want something, Theodore said. If they wanted us dead, we would be already. They're containing us, waiting for something. For what? Brendan wondered. The answer came in the form of a distant rumble. Not from above, where they expected the strike to come from, but from below. The ground trembled. A localized earthquake that sent dust cascading from the old Soviet buildings. They're opening a larger breach, Theodore realized, using the original facility as an anchor point. The decision made itself. New mission, Theodore announced. We go back. We end this ourselves. How? TSA asked. The tunnel is collapsed. There's another way in, Theodore revealed. A maintenance shaft half a kilometer from here. It was on the original Chimera maps, but we never used it. And once we're inside, Victor pressed. Theodore checked his watch, the old SEAL timepiece that had started this mission. We have 25 minutes before the strike. We find the device and we destroy it properly this time.